concept of evil is a huge topic in the Guide for the Perplexed. In fact, if you Google around about Maimonides, one of the things that will very fast come up is that he has these ideas about evil. It is also one of the parts I found to be very interesting, to be honest, reading about evil and how we explain what evil is and a different aspect of evil. It really opened my eyes on the concept of evil and how we live our lives, and sometimes how we live our lives we end up hurting ourselves. Now I'm going to create another video to talk about different types of evil, but in this video let me talk about what he considers to be evil, like how he defines to evil to be. So he says that for him, or according to him, evil are the negatives, like negations. Let me use. He says all evils are negations, like they are the how can I put it? Like they are the not being of something, the non-existence of something. Then it becomes evil. He says that there is no way the being of something is evil. I will read how he says this. He says, evils are evils only in relation to a certain thing, and that which is evil in reference to certain existing thing neither includes the non-existence of that thing or the non-existence of some of its good conditions. So for him, he says there are things that are created, and the absence of those things become evil. Or there are things that are done, the absence of those becomes evil. Thus, for man, death is evil because it is the lack of life or the non-existence of life. Illness is evil because it's the lack of good health, the way he puts it. It's a lack of, he explains, it's a lack of the ideal balance of the state of your body. Then you are ill. So that is the lack of that balance, and that becomes evil. Poverty is evil because it's the lack of material to support yourself. Ignorance is evil because it's the lack of knowledge. So he says all these are things, or he calls them privations of properties, the lack of. And he says all the great evils which men cause to each other because of certain intentions, desires, opinions, or religious principles are likewise due to non-existence, because they originate in ignorance, which is absence of wisdom. So to him, every evil is absence of something. That's how he describes, that's how Maimonides describes evil. And he also says that when especially in regard to the evil that we do to one another, and he says it's the absence of wisdom, because he says if we had wisdom, then we will not hurt ourselves and others. This is how he describes it. He uses this analogy of a blind person. He says, a blind man, for example, who has no guide, stumbles constantly because he cannot see, and causes injury and harm to himself and to others. In the same manner, various classes of men, each man is proportion to his ignorance, and brings great evils upon themselves and upon other individual members of the species. Like people do evil because they are ignorant, and because they are ignorant, they do evil to themselves, and they also do evil to others. If they are unwise, then they will not do evil to themselves, and they will not do evil to others. If men possessed wisdom, which stands in the same relation to the form of man as the sight to the eye, they will not cause any injury to themselves or to others. For the knowledge of truth removes hatred and quarrels and prevent mutual injuries. It continues to say, it cannot be said of God that he directly creates evil. Now, that's a different point he's making here. So the previous point he was making is that the lack of knowledge and wisdom is what causes people to do evil to themselves and to do evil to others. Now he talks about the origin of evil, or the relation of evil and God, because there is always this question, did God create evil? So for him, he says, we cannot say that God created evil directly, because he has the direct intention to he has the direct intention to produce evil. This is impossible, and it's impossible because he has already described evil as negations. They are lack of. So God cannot create lack of. But he acknowledges that he only produces existence, and all existence is good, while evils are of negative character and cannot be acted upon. That's what he says. But he still acknowledges he creates evil only insofar as he produces the corporeal element. such as it actually is, it is always connected with the negatives and is on that account the source of all destruction and evil. That the fact that he creates something, if that thing goes away, then there is evil. Then you might say God has created evil, but he didn't create the evil directly. A good example is death. Death is evil. But there cannot be death without life. There must be life so that there is death. So God creates life. And when that life goes, then that becomes an evil. But God did not create that evil. The evil comes into existence when the life that God created expired. Then we count it as evil. But he talks about this specific point of that kind of evil, for example, the death in particular, and he goes into a lot of detail, which made sense to me because something I've thought about. Some of these things we think of them as evil because they affect us personally, but if we removed ourselves from the equation and looked at things from the bigger picture, then they are not really evil. Even death is not evil. In fact, he says death itself is a good thing. Personally, this is not what he said, but personally I've had the view that death is a good thing because it removes us from misery most of the time. If there was no death, then there's likely was going to be a lot of suffering. Anyway, that's what I've thought myself. That's not what he says, but he does say that death is good, and I'm going to read. Even the existence of this corporeal element, low as it in reality is, because it is the source of death and all evil, is likewise a good for the permanence of the universe and the continuation of the order of things, so that one thing departs and the other succeed. And he quotes another rabbi called Rabbi Meir, therefore explains the words, and behold, it was very good, and that even death was good in accordance with what we have observed in this chapter. So if there was no death, then there will be no new life, because new life has to come in, then the old life has to go. It's basically what he says. And he continues to say, men frequently think that the evil in the world are more numerous than the good things. Many sayings and songs, nations dwell on this idea. Yeah, most of us always think that there's more evil than good in the universe or in the world. And he says this, this is not an accurate observation. And he says some of this comes from us thinking that the entire universe is made for us. So when something bad happens, we just think of ourselves, and that way we end up thinking that there's a lot more evil in the world than there is good. And in fact, he calls it that this is foolish. He calls it foolish. For an ignorant man believes that the whole universe only exists for him, and if nothing else required any consideration. If therefore anything happens to him contrary to his expectation, he at once concludes that the whole universe is evil. In fact, he does put it even in better. I'm just here picking a few things, but if you read the book itself, there's a way he explains it, and then you realize that indeed sometimes we count evil in a way that maybe is not accurate. It's based on our own subjective perspective.